Let's take a look at step 3. Step 3 says summarize the total cost to account for. If you remember, if you look at your flow of production, costs to account for are your beginning working process and cost added during May. So you're going to look at cost to account for. Again, these are costs, so you're going to put in dollar amounts. In step 1 and 2, we looked at units, which is our output and input in terms of units, but here we're going to look at dollar amounts. So let's look at the cost to account for. You're going to set up your problem to look like this. Again, you're going to have two columns for direct materials and conversion cost, and you could have another column if you like for total cost, but we'll talk about that later. Then you're going to have your flow of production here, but you're only going to have the cost to account for portion. So you're going to have a line for beginning working process and cost added during May. These three things are the only section that applies to step 3. Next, we need to take a look at our beginning working process on May 1st. We need to take a look at your data table that they gave you and figure out how much of your beginning working process cost related to direct materials and how much related to conversion cost. If you look at that information, they've told you that beginning working process $800 in direct materials and $4,000 in conversion costs. So you just put those amounts in the corresponding columns. Next, we look at cost added during the month of May. Again, your data table tells you how much direct material was added and how much conversion costs were incurred in the month of May. So what you're going to do is, again, put $6,000, which was the cost of direct materials, and $32,400, which are conversion costs. So what are your total costs to account for this period? You're going to add the direct material totaled up, and you have 6,800 direct materials that you need to account for. And you add the two up and you have a total of 36,400 that you need to account for. It would be helpful at this point to figure out what is the total cost you have to account for. If you add those two up, you find that your total cost that you have to account for is 43,200, which is the 6,800 plus 36,400. What will you use this total for? When you go on to step 5, you're just going to make sure that the total cost that you ended up with is going to equal the total cost to account for you had in step 3. Moving on to step 4. Step 4 says compute the cost per equivalent unit. That's what you're going to use these next two line items for. So you'll set it up where you're going to have, all you're going to do is you're going to divide the cost that you came up here, the 6,800 and the 36,400, divided by the total equivalent units that you came up with in step 2. In step 2, we said our total equivalent units for direct materials was 17,000. You can flip back to your pages and look at that. We ended up with total equivalent units of 17,000 for direct materials. Therefore, cost per equivalent unit is calculated by dividing your 6,800 by the 17,000, giving you 40 cents per unit for direct materials. Similarly, for conversion costs, we came up with 18,200 to be our equivalent units for conversion costs, and that was again in step 2. You divide that by your cost to account for conversion costs, and you end up with $2 per equivalent unit. Now we've just completed step 3 and 4. Our final step is step 5, and step 5 says to assign costs to units completed and to units in ending work in process. What you're going to do is you will have to set up your problem using this format. So here we're going to assign costs. Again, you're going to have two columns for direct materials and conversion costs, and then you're going to calculate how much cost for your completed and transferred out. And then you're going to have a section to calculate your ending work in process inventory. Ending work in process inventory would have to be separated into direct materials and conversion cost. And then finally, this total cost to account for, we're going to calculate that. In step 4, we figured out that our direct materials were 40 cents per item or per unit, and our conversion cost came out to be $2 per unit. So now that you know what cost per unit is, it's easy to calculate how much is the completed and transferred out inventory worth. You know that you calculated or you transferred out 16,000 units. So the cost of that is 16,000 times 40 cents. That's the cost of direct materials plus 16,000 times $2, which is the conversion cost, giving you a total of 38,400 for your completed and transferred out units. Next thing is to calculate how much your ending work in process inventory is. This is going to be a two-step process because we're going to have to calculate the cost of direct materials and conversion costs separately. When you're calculating the cost, you're not going to use the 4,000 physical units of ending work in process you have, but we need to convert it. Remember, we converted it to a common denominator by calculating equivalent units. You're going to use your equivalent units to calculate the cost of direct materials and conversion costs. So we had 1,000 units, equivalent units of direct materials. Each unit is 40 cents per unit. Therefore, the cost of your direct materials in your ending work in process is $400. Similarly, you had 2,200 units of conversion cost, equivalent units in your conversion cost. Each of that is worth $2 each. So your conversion cost for your ending work in process is 4,400. Now, when we add up these two numbers, you get the total cost of your ending work in process inventory, which is 4,800. So now we've come up with a value for completed and transferred out, which is 38,400, and our ending work in process, which is 4,800. These are the total costs that would have been input into the process. That's called your total costs accounted for, which is 1 plus 2, which is 43,200. If you did this problem correctly, this would be the same as the total cost that we calculated in step 3. We had 43,200 going in, and they came out as 38,400 completed units. That's the cost of the completed units. And our ending work in process, we valued it at 4,800, accounting for the whole 43,200 that we put into the process. So your total cost to account for, which we calculated in step 3, is equal to your total cost accounted for, which we calculated in step 5. I know this is very complicated, but be sure to write down each step, set it up the way that the Excel spreadsheets were set up, because every single problem we do in class and every single problem that you're going to encounter is going to be these 5 steps. So if you know how to set up the problem from steps 1 to 5 and do these calculations, you can never go wrong with a process costing problem. We will do lots and lots of practice problems in class, but be sure to write this down and bring it to class because this is the methodology we'll be using in class.